This simple scene looks kind of boring. It would be more interesting if it were using depth of field. And this video is about how to make sure the focal point in your rendering is correct, that you're focusing on the right point in the scene. First off, let's look at the scene. In the camera settings, let's activate depth of field. It automatically activates it in the viewport as well. And you can see it does depth of field, but the focus is somewhere in the middle. It's not quite right. So how do we know what the exact right focus distance is? We can use the measure tool for that. We can create measure tools, distance tool, and we can put this in, and we go to top view for that by clicking at the camera and clicking at the bunny, and we get the distance between the camera and the bunny if we want the focus to be on the bunny. This is not quite exact. We actually want the first locator, which we'll call camera location, exactly at the camera. So we middle mouse drag it under the render cam and make sure that all the translations and rotations are 0. So the first one is now exactly at the camera. The second one is going to be our focus point, which we'll place exactly at the nose of the bunny, for instance. And we can place it exactly by looking at all 4 views. I lock the camera, so if I do Shift F, it only focuses the other views, and move it exactly to the nose of the bunny right there. So we can now see in our distance dimension tool that the distance is about 3.5. So if we go to our camera settings and we set the focus distance to 3.5, that should put the focus at the nose of the bunny. So it turns out 3.5 is a bit too precise. If we put it at 3.6, like at the head of the bunny, we can actually see it in the viewport that it's now the correct focus distance. And it would be nice if this distance between these 2 locators were automatically piped into this focus distance, and we can do this in the node editor. Here's our node editor, and in our node editor we need the render camera and the distance dimension, and from both we need the shape. The distance dimension has an output called distance. The render cam shape has an input, and I hit 3 to open them up, an input called focus distance. Don't accidentally do focal length, that's the width of the lens. Distance goes into focus distance. And now it will automatically copy the distance from the distance dimension into the focus distance. And if we now take the locator and move it, you can see it actually changes the focus distance. And if we look at the top view, let's actually look at them both. I can put it at the table or at the chair or at the teapot. So this actually works. But if I go to my render view, it still renders completely in focus. This is because I've activated the depth of field in the camera, but not in the Arnold settings that has a separate depth of field right here and a separate focus distance. So we're not quite there yet. We need to go again to our node editor and not just pipe it into this focus distance, but also in the Arnold focus distance. So we go take our distance, go connect to another input, the other input way down at all the Arnold inputs, and I found it, the AI focus distance. Now the focus distance in the camera is also correct in the Arnold settings. It still will not render with depth of field unless you increase the aperture size. If you make it a ridiculous 1, and that's depending on your scene size. If you have a really large scene, 1 might actually not be that ridiculous. It's completely out of focus. So let's lower that to a 0.1. And we get a scene where most is out of focus, but the nose of the bunny should be exactly in focus, or the head of the bunny, because that's where we put our focus point. The focus is indeed in the front of the image, but it's not quite correct. So let me adjust that. Stop the rendering. Go to 4 window view. And make sure, look, it's behind the bunny. Let's put it right smack in the head of the bunny. This should be more correctly putting it at the bunny. Let's render that. Oh, I got something selected. That's no good. And let's wait for it. And the focus is indeed somewhere here in the middle of the head of the bunny. Apparently for this small scene, because the focus is so close to the camera, a 0.1 setting on the aperture is still rather large. So let me make that a little bit smaller. Let's go to half of that and render it once more. And there we have it. The bunny is nicely in focus, and also the back of the teapot, because it happens to be at the same distance from the camera, and the background is nicely out of focus. And by moving the focal point, we can determine exactly what we want to have in focus in our scene.